Hello guys, Jack here and welcome to Pike and Shot. This is a strategy war game set in the 16th and 17th century, and if you can't tell, it consists of line battles between two armies. We're playing as the Dutch, with the enemy being the French. This battle set around 1650, with the main army composition being pike and shot units. These units have pikemen to protect against cavalry and musketeers to engage in range combat. We also have cannons and of course horse units, which main purpose is to engage in the flanks then hopefully wrap around the enemy. You can see we have dragoons on the south sides, which are just mounted musketmen and are good for harassing the enemy. In the center you can see we have our main infantry blocks filling up the choke point between these two forests, supported by cannons, and then we also have a number of cavalry units in the north and a few to the south. The game is turn-based. You move your units, fire if you want to, or you can engage in hand-to-hand combat. Any shots you don't use will be automatically assigned in the residual shooting phase, like is happening right now, and then enemy units will automatically fire if they haven't already returned fire. Melee will then occur, and the other player will then get their turn, and then the actions repeat. Each unit has strengths as weaknesses, as you would expect, so of course, horse movements move a lot faster than infantry. And flanking is very effective, so maneuvering is arguably the most important part of combat. You can see here in the south, we've added a few platoons, and they've just popped through the forest and seen that the enemy has a few cavalry units there, so they're starting to engage in combat. My unit was hidden in the forest there, so the enemy unit couldn't see it, and then it also gets a bit of a cover advantage. However, being in trees makes cavalry units a little bit disordered because they can't stay in formation, which makes sense because they're trees, so they're a little bit less effective. You generally don't kill entire enemy units either, which is interesting and accurate for the time period. You instead break the morale by causing casualties, 5, 10 deaths at a time, and then once they take enough, their morale breaks, and that causes them to rout and run away. Sometimes then your units will pursue them, and that's where a lot of casualties will be dealt. But you also have to be careful because your units might pursue too far and then expose them to be attacking. So you have to be careful about everything you do. You can see here the enemy is starting to advance his infantry. He has light cannons and lots of pike and shot. Me, I have medium cannons, which are a little bit bigger, along with a heavy cannon set up on the hill. And you can see combat started in the north now. My dragoons are being engaged, which isn't great because they're not really good at hand-to-hand combat, because if you remember, they're musketeers, so they don't have any like bayonets to defend them or pike. They're really meant for harassing the enemy at a distance, like these guys are doing in the woods. Clicking on a unit gives you some information. At the top you can see that there's a little green symbol, which I'll point out when it shows up, and that's their effectiveness in hand-to-hand combat. You can see there at the top. This is determined by what type of unit they are, what weapons they have, and then also the size of the unit. Yellow is their ranged effectiveness, how much damage they can deal. And then gray is their armor, how much damage they can reduce. There's different troop qualities, which you can see. Like, for example, in the left there, it says they're steady or determined horse. So that means they're of a higher quality. Sometimes you'll see like raw pike and shot units, which means they've just been raised, and so they're not very effective. Their morale will break easier and they're not as good at combat. Whereas, say, a veteran unit, they'll have more morale and they'll be better at fighting. However, in these open battles that you do, often the AI will just assign you guys both an army based on the same number of command points you have. So raw units are obviously much cheaper than veteran units, and you kind of have to have both, because if you don't, if you just have veteran units, they'll be too expensive and you won't really have enough units to cover the whole field of battle. So you can see in the south we're engaging a little bit of musket fire still, and in the north things are happening. I'm breaking some of their units, and we followed that guy into the woods. And here, my cavalry unit here broke the enemy unit. He ran to the north. My guy followed to pursue, but instead of following him, he found a new target to the left and charged into him, which dealt some good damage. You can see they advance to the center. We get some automatic return fire, which I was talking about. And there's our first disrupted unit. So basically, that's the first stage of the morale breaking. A normal unit will have nothing above their head and they'll say steadied. Then that guy, he was disrupted, so he's taken a few casualties, and so he's, he can still fight, but they're not too happy. After that, they become fragmented and they're really weak. They can't charge enemies and they're almost useless. And then after that, they'll break and run away. There's a chance at any stage that the unit will either gain more morale and come back to more fighting effectiveness, or if enemy units are dying around them, sorry, if friendly units are dying around them or running away, their morale might break even further. So you kind of have to be careful because you can get a chain reaction of your own units all running away if they see their allies running away. Okay, back to strategy. You can see that there's a few more French horsemen in the north because I put quite a few in the southeast. And also the French cavalry are a bit better than me, however, and more numerous. However, I have a few more pike and shot units in the south and more cannon, which are putting in a lot of work. Every turn they're dealing damage. And here we go, our pike and shot units charge theirs and they break and run because they've been pestered by cannon fire and muskets. We also managed to charge their light guns and those go away. And we can see in the north, because there's a lot of cavalry action, I'm actually moving 2 of my reserve units through the forest to go help in the north because, I don't know, it's already not looking good. If you look in the mini map in the bottom right, you can see that looks like a big blob of red, which is the enemy. Thankfully, we caused one of their units to break, and an auto break is just when they take a certain threshold of cavalries, usually about half of their total HP, and the unit just breaks regardless of what their morale was at. Sometimes you find with superior units, they just don't really break, especially if they don't get flanked or something like that, and they stay alive. Flanking, as you can see, if it's the right unit type, can cause the enemy morale to instantly drop 1, which makes sense because, you know, say you're fighting someone in the front and then you see a big swarm of enemies coming from behind you or to your side, that's scary, and so it causes a big morale debuff. Which is why I was talking about maneuvering being important, because you don't want to expose your flanks to the enemies. There you go, you saw a rally, so my morale went up. You know, nothing bad had happened to them for a little bit and they're not scared, and so they came back to more fighting quality. So you can see here in the center, we've just been pestering the enemy with musket fire, and there hasn't even really been that much hand-to-hand combat, and we're generally pushing them back, which is helpful because we have, you know, more infantry blocks than them, but we also have this cannon fire, which is great. In the south, it seems okay, you know, we're holding them, but we do have more units. In the north, though, it's starting to look bad. You can see my units are getting fragmented, a couple have ran away, and we're outnumbered, which is why I was sending those infantry blocks up to support them. But they have to walk through forest, so it'll take a few turns. You can see this guy just absolutely got destroyed. He shot me because it was his turn, but then all of my surrounding units in the vicinity returned fire before he could do anything else, and he went to disrupted, and then he auto broke and ran away, so not a good turn for him. See some cannon fire dealing some casualties, residual fire, and cannons are very unreliable. Sometimes they'll just totally miss, and then sometimes they do lots of damage. And I believe cannon fire is generally more effective at breaking their morale than musket fire, which makes sense because giant balls of steel rolling towards you is scary as hell. You can see we lost another unit there. We do break a unit in the center, which is bad because it's our unit that broke. But we're finally getting our infantry blocks up to support. And one thing you'll notice there is my units were right next to those horses, but they didn't deal that much damage. And that's because if a unit turns or moves, their firing effectiveness is significantly reduced. The unit has to be standing still for a minute before they're like ready. And so you can see there, these guys have been standing still, and so the amount of damage they can deal is a lot higher. It also has to do with the size of the enemy units. The big pike and shot blocks have 500, sometimes 1,000, and in some circumstances even 2,000 men in it, which makes them larger targets. Something interesting is on the initial turn, when say you have a small cavalry unit, like 200 people charging into a 500 person pike and shot unit, the initial turn that they fight, it will only be like 100 versus 100, you know, your front rank versus where they charge, because it's not accounting for the other enemies, because at the point of impact, those people wouldn't be there fighting. And so the first turn can be good, but as the fighting progresses for a few more turns, generally the rest of the unit will come and surround you, and then they'll be taking more and more damage. You can see here we get a good charge. These detached musketeers in the center are really good for hanging out in the forest and harassing units, but out in the open they're pretty vulnerable. Fortunately, these guys charge us and they actually break one of our units. I guess they're taking lots of casualties. Some of our horse is disrupted in the back, which isn't good. lots of fire happening. That guy just took, oh my god, like 75 deaths, which isn't good, or not necessarily deaths. Sometimes they're wounded too, which is the same thing. And you can see this guy move forward and just got a bunch of shots, and he became fragmented. And you can see we're starting to get flanked here too as they push through. So really what we're seeing is that the French cavalry is superior to the Dutch cavalry. And, you know, maybe I'm not the best cavalry commander, and so they're generally breaking through. Whereas in the center, our Pike is much more numerous and is really helping and being good. Maybe if I could have redone this, I might have sent like 2 pikemen, pike and shot units to the north, and maybe 1 earlier to the south, so 2 and 2 on each flank to support my cavalry. But maybe if I'd done that, that would have caused a different reaction by the enemy, and my center would have been more open. You can see here, I'm really just trying to shoot the enemy with my muskets and break their courage a little bit. You can see here, I go there for a side attack, or not quite, because the 3 units on the front don't count as a side, and I charge, but we take 24 casualties versus their 5, and our unit is immediately like, oh shit, gets disrupted and runs away. One thing that's good is if you break a unit with rifle fire, like you just saw there, or musket fire, your units don't pursue them. If you break them after, you know, prolonged melee combat or by doing a charge on them, your units will pursue, which I've talked about earlier. Now, that can be a good thing because if you have the enemy units and yours in just the right spot, they can pursue or charge, break the unit, pursue them, and then go into the side of an enemy unit and charge them too, and you get kind of like a 2-for-1 or sometimes even a 3-for-1 on one turn and break a whole bunch of enemies. But like I mentioned, if you're not careful, they'll run too deep into the enemy lines and then get pwned by the surrounding enemy units. You can see I have a really strong position on the hill here. As the units advance to do anything, they're just getting shot 3 times as much as they're shooting, taking way too many casualties. Up on the hill, things still aren't going great. More of my units are leaving. We've gotten rid of a few of their cavalry units, but generally it's a negative. And it's starting to become the same situation in the southeast too, which isn't great. Luckily, on both sides, we have our pike and shot units there, which are helping out. Now, when muskets originally came into combat and, you know, were supported by pikemen, they had really deep units. And what would happen is all the muskets couldn't fire effectively. And I believe it was Sweden and a Swedish king that originally pioneered the idea of making them a little bit shallower and larger, you know, more similar to like musket battles in the time of Napoleon. And what this does is it makes more of your muskets able to fire at a certain time, or at the same time. You know, by Napoleonic era, so, you know, 1800, I believe it was either 2 or 3 lines, you know, maybe a 4th if you wanted more, but the first guys would be sitting down or kneeling down, and then the other guy could fire over their head while the 3rd line was reloading. And so what this allowed was for more firing and, you know, more damage output. Whereas in these ones with these deep units, less of your units are able to fire. And so like I mentioned, this game covers about 200 years. And so when you start off, there's like lots of bows still and lancers on horseback. And then by the end, it's more musketmen with bayonets and cavalry that do charges and fire their pistols right before impact. It's pretty interesting. This battle, of course, is near the end. It's scenario Le Roi du Soleil, which is the French king, but it's really just referring to a time period. There's also like English Civil War period, Italian wars, things like that. This is actually, you know, pike and shot and campaigns, and so there's campaign battles you can do, but unfortunately it's not like Rome 2 or anything like that where there's a persistent campaign map. Instead, it's just scenarios, and they can be fun, but my favorite part is just these open battles like this. You can see we're a little bit more evenly matched in the south. In the center, we're still definitely pushing through, but we've totally lost the north. However, by the time that happens, we have our pike units in a really good formation, and they can't really break through and harass anything. Dealing lots of damage to these horsemen with all of our musket fire. And cannon fire too. but a lot of them miss too. You can see here we're engaged in two fronts. And as you can see that enemy unit, the arrows facing them straight on and then diagonally, but those both count as the front. You actually have to come from like directly the side to count as a side attack, just like that. And as you can see, that immediately disrupts it. And here we go, we're getting some really effective musket fire, fragmenting and disrupting their units. And now, like I mentioned, you know, you're basically causing units to run away. That's what wins you the battle. And the threshold for winning a battle is routing 40% of the enemy units with at least a 25% lead. So, you know, if you've lost 10% of your units and they've lost 40, you'll win. However, if you route 40% of the units and you've also lost like 30 or 35 of yours, the game won't end. However, if anybody gets to 60% routed, the game will end. So the south is a little messy. Some of my units are breaking, some of their units are breaking, but generally we're holding strong with the infantry backing. Like I mentioned, we're still pushing through in the center. And in the north, it's a little bit of a stalemate, but, well, not a stalemate. We lost with the cavalry, and then now we're winning with the infantry. So it's still hard to tell which way it's going, but we haven't taken many casualties on our infantry blocks, and they've been losing their cavalry. So now I think it's safe to say that we're winning. You can see on the melee turns, that's when the units rout and run away. And like I said, there's a chance they'll come back, but then there's also a chance that they'll disappear if they're around for enough turns. However, if they're routing and they run off the edge of the map, they will disappear. If you're pursuing a unit, sometimes you'll pursue right off the edge of the map, but after a few turns, those units will generally come back, but not always, which is really annoying. However, they don't count as a loss, like a routed troop, so I'd rather have the unit fighting for me, but at least it's not a negative thing. When units are fragmented, like I mentioned, they can't charge. They're really ineffective in combat, and they also have reduced movement. So you can see there I charged and he broke, ran right away. And you can see there one of their units came back in the north. And that's a specialty for cavalry units. If they're close enough, they can charge, and if combat doesn't go their way, they can pull back, which is good. And light units like hussars, light cavalry, the commanded shot, which are those detached musketeers, and dragoons, if you have enough movement left, so like if you can move, say, 5 tiles, but you only move 1 on your turn or not at all, if the enemy charges you, you'll be able to use your remaining combat. Even though it's not your turn, it's their turn, and your unit will automatically run away, which is good. Because, like I mentioned way at the start, dragoons, you know, they have a not great melee stat and a pretty decent fighting stat. Or, sorry, shooting stat. And so what you want to do is pest the enemy from far and run away. You can see there, those poor detached cavalry got absolutely pwned and shot a lot. What you'll see too in the top left, you're able to check what the percentage is, and they're at about 45 or so, and we're in the 30s, I believe. So not enough to end the game, but we're definitely looking good. And as you can see, more and more of their units are breaking, and get a bit of a chain reaction. Some nice cannon fire. And you can see that heavy gun on the hill in the south. Originally it was facing to the north and pestering those guys, but now that we've noted that, you know, the south is in some trouble, I take 2 turns to turn it because it's slow and lumbering, and it's able to deal some fire. And here we go. We finally break enough of the enemy, and you can see the percentages here, and we win. However, even though we've won, I think we can deal a bit more damage. So I decline letting the battle end, and I instead want to choose to fight the enemy more. I want to make sure that, you know, I really have this. The enemy totally ran. Perhaps it's not the most honorable. Anyway, so we move our infantry more, take some more fire on those horsemen. And then there's also these 2 infantry blocks in the north. Once we get rid of those guys, I think it will be good. However, bad turn of events. Those guys charge, our units break, and then our fresh units that we just sent up north to support them get a little bit disheartened. So it's actually not great up there for now. We have more infantry blocks going up to support, so that's good. Our cannon fire also deals some good cavalry to those horsemen, and they get disheartened and run away too. Move these guys up north, deal some fire. Moving our infantry in the south to deal some more fire to their enemy units. These guys are just getting flanked on the sides. Rifle fire from everywhere. I have these guys turned, so next turn they'll be able to better engage. You can see some of the units are rallying, coming back, but others are breaking, so that's to be expected. These guys charge, and our units break, which isn't great. You can see one of their pike and shot units is following ours with broke, but they're coming right into our 2 units in the center. We have cannon fire 2, causes another unit to break, and it's supporting our units in the south. And right there you can see there's our line of 3, one of which in the middle is running away, but the other 2 are still standing strong. Fortunately, we are losing some units as well. Those guys charge us and they go away, but we're able to disrupt those enemies. And we get a really nice hit there, 31, and that causes them to just run away. I can't blame them. And muskets have a range of 4. However, if they're 3 or 4 tiles away, that counts as long range, so they're a bit less effective. And if they're 1 or 2 tiles away, it's closer range, so it's better, and you deal more damage. Which makes sense, because early muskets, or hell, even until probably the 19th century, were generally pretty inaccurate. You can see we're tag teaming these guys. We move our stronger unit up first and fire, because that draws the fire from the enemy unit on our strong unit, and then our fragmented unit is able to fire. If we'd shot with that fragmented unit first, they probably would have broken and ran away after taking, you know, the full brunt of that shot. And I do love the sound of the musket and cannon fire and the residual phase. It's just boop, 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 back and forth. And that's nice. We break those cavalry that were coming in behind our units. Our pike unit comes back, which is good. And these guys get flanked and they're fragmented, so they're basically gone already. Nice cannon fire there. I turn, take a shot. Not too many. These guys are going to shoot again too. I'm surprised they didn't break there, to be honest. I move that guy there, and then that hits the threshold, and they're gone. So in the south, there's nothing really left. In the north here, there's just this one unit, which is severely outnumbered and taking quite a bit of damage. In the center, it's just these 2 units. One of them is basically destroyed already in the center, and then the one in the north is being attacked by our unit. And even if the unit that was fighting him up there runs away, we still have like 3 more that can go and attack. So I definitely say that we've taken care of the enemy here. Now, every game also has a turn timer. In some cases, if it's you know, about equal, both people, there'll be no clear victor. If there's the defender will technically get the victory, but it's not clear cut. And if you're attacking, technically you'll lose. However, here, because we kept fighting the enemy, even after we technically won, we were in victory. Right now, this is just committing war crimes. And there you go. Turn timer ends. It's night. Nightfall ends the slaughter. And you can see we get a glorious victory. You can see the total unit strength, both about 13,000. As you can see, the enemy had way more units killed, wounded, and captured, deserted. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you'd like to. Puts a big grin on my face, and have a lovely day. Take care.